You look at a highly successful career or even just a massive historical legacy, and there's almost always this unspoken expectation of a perfectly engineered blueprint.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we completely crave that narrative. We want success to be, you know, visible and neatly categorized.
Right. You pull up a visionary's resume or you're scrolling through a modern CEO's LinkedIn profile, and it just reads like this clean, unbroken, inevitable line upward.
Yeah, it feels really safe to believe that extreme achievement follows a strict mathematical formula, right? Like anyone could theoretically just copy and paste it if they had the right inputs.
Exactly. You study hard, you land the prestigious internship, you get the promotion, you launch the groundbreaking company, and then boom, you triumph. It feels so binary. Like it's just success or failure.
But then you actually look under the hood.
Yeah.
You step away from the polished biographies and into the real day-to-day granular mechanics of how someone builds an empire, or honestly, even just how they manage their own chaotic mind.
Right. And suddenly that clean timeline completely shatters.
Exactly. The professional landscape you actually find is incredibly messy. It is full of embarrassing mistakes, bizarre detours, and, frankly, moments of utter humiliation.
Yeah, the reality of extreme success is rarely a straight line. I mean, it's a series of frantic, sometimes desperate course corrections in incredibly muddy waters.
It's so true.
Think about this image for a second. A runaway teenager arrives in a new city. He's completely disheveled, covered in dirt from a brutal journey, and his pockets are just stuffed with his dirty scare shirts and stockings because he doesn't even own a bag.
Just a completely chaotic entrance.
Right. He's exhausted, he is starving, and his entire net worth consists of a single Dutch dollar.
Wow.
So he wanders into a baker's shop, has absolutely no idea what the local bread is called, and just asks for whatever he can get for 3 pennies. And he walks out with 3 massive puffy rolls.
Which is just a funny visual.
It really is. He has no room in his pocket, so he's walking up the main street of this new city with a giant roll of bread under each arm, ravenously tearing into the third. And as he passes a house, a young woman standing in the doorway takes one look at this ridiculous, awkward vagrant, and she just bursts out laughing at him.
And the crazy part is, that vagrant double-fisting bread is the guy on the $100 bill.
Exactly.
And that young woman laughing at him. That's Miss Reed, the woman who would eventually become his wife.
It's wild. Well, welcome to today's deep dive. It is Sunday, April 26th, 2026, and today we are extracting the ultimate playbook for professional decision-making and continuous self-improvement from someone who practically invented the genre.
Yes, we are.
The source material you shared with us is the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, along with, a few of his incredibly revealing personal letters and essays. We are going to look at how that runaway teenager transformed himself into an absolute master of business, diplomacy, and science.
And what's really vital to establish right at the top here is the sheer modern utility of this text. We are not just cataloging facts about some 18th century figure in a powdered wig.
No, not at all.
We're looking at a highly practical framework. The systems Franklin built for networking, his literal spreadsheets for habit tracking, and his philosophies for professional growth, they're directly applicable to you today. Whether you're in a modern boardroom, the startup ecosystem, or just focusing on your own personal development.
It's really an exploration of moving from raw, abrasive ambition to calculated, highly effective emotional intelligence.
Exactly. Because before anyone can conquer the business world or the scientific world or negotiate with the courts of Europe, they have to conquer their own internal friction.
Yeah, and for Franklin, growing up in Boston, that friction was his own incredibly abrasive personality.
Oh, he was tough to be around.
He really was. He was obsessed with books as a kid, John Bunyan, Daniel Defoe, Plutarch's Lives. But he was also deeply, relentlessly argumentative.
Right, because he grew up in a household where his father, Josiah Franklin, had a library that was mostly books on polemic divinity.
Which sounds intense.
It is. These were intense, granular theological arguments. So young Franklin naturally just absorbed this disputatious style. He loved the combat of a debate.
He just wanted to win.
Right, he loved to corner someone and prove them wrong. He had this friend named John Collins, and the two of them would just relentlessly spar.
Oh, the letters.
Yes. At one point, they were debating whether women should be educated, and they ended up writing these long, combative letters back and forth, really just to try and score rhetorical points on each other.
Which, I mean, anyone who has ever watched a corporate Slack channel devolve into a heated, multi-thread argument over some minor project detail knows exactly what that energy looks like.
Oh, 100%.
It's no longer about solving the problem,
Yeah.
right? It just becomes a game of ego and scoring points.
Yeah, you completely lose the plot.
And Franklin is entirely caught up in this. But then his father intercepts these letters. And rather than wading into the actual topic of female education, his father critiques Franklin's foundational communication style.
Which is such a smart parenting move, actually.
It is. He points out that while Franklin spells well and punctuates perfectly, his elegance of expression, his method, and his clarity are completely lacking. He's basically saying, you're blunt, you're disorganized, and you're aggressive.
And, most teenagers, or frankly, most adults receiving that kind of critique would immediately throw up their defenses.
Oh, absolutely, I would.
Right, they double down. But Franklin does the exact opposite. He internalizes the critique and realizes, okay, I need a massive upgrade. And the sheer mechanical rigor he applies to upgrading his communication skills is just staggering.
He doesn't just make some vague resolution to, write better.
No, he engineers a whole system. He gets his hands on an odd volume of The Spectator, which was this highly regarded, elegantly written British periodical by Joseph Addison and Richard Steele.
Right.
He reads the essays, and then he engages in this fascinating process of basically reverse engineering the prose.
I read this part of the text, and I immediately thought of a modern software development.
Oh, how so?
Like reverse engineering a hit app to understand its architecture. Franklin takes the final product, the essay, and breaks it down into its base code.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, he writes out short hints, essentially bullet points, summarizing the core sentiment of each sentence. Then he sets the original essay aside for a few days so he forgets the exact phrasing.
Right, letting it leave his short-term memory.
Exactly. And then, looking only at his hints, he tries to rebuild the essay entirely from scratch. He compiles it back together and then compares his version against the original to discover his faults and correct them.
And the psychology behind this is brilliant. He's forcing his brain to internalize the structural logic of a compelling argument. But he quickly hits a wall.
The vocabulary issue.
Yes, he realizes his vocabulary is just too limited. He knows the words, but he can't recall them quickly enough to use them effectively. So, to solve this, he adds another layer of complexity. He takes those prose essays and translates them into poetry.
Okay, wait, why poetry, though? Because that seems like a bizarre detour if your goal is to write better business or philosophical prose.
It does seem weird at first, but poetry forces linguistic flexibility. When you're writing prose, you can kind of just rely on your default vocabulary. But when you are forced to rhyme or fit a specific meter, your default words won't work anymore.
Ah, because the rhythm is wrong.
Exactly. You have to actively search your mental lexicon for synonyms of varying lengths, different rhythms, and different rhymes that carry the exact same meaning. It literally maps new neural pathways.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, so he would turn the essays into poems, wait until he had completely forgotten the original prose, and then force himself to translate his own poetry back into prose.
It is a brutal mental workout. And he even talks about jumbling his hints into total confusion, waiting weeks, and then trying to assemble them into the most logical order before rewriting the sentences. He is basically teaching himself structural method and logical flow. And he's doing all of this by candlelight, after a grueling day of physical labor at a printing press, or like sneaking into the printing house alone on Sundays.
Which just shows his incredible drive. And he successfully overhauls his writing. But, writing is asynchronous. You have time to edit.
Right, you can pause.
The real bottleneck for his future success was real-time interaction. He was still this combative, in-your-face debater.
Yeah, he hadn't fixed his actual personality yet.
Exactly. But then he reads Xenophon's memorable Things of Socrates and discovers the Socratic method. And he is just utterly charmed by the idea of the humble inquirer.
The guy who just asks questions.
Right. So he decides to completely drop the abrupt contradiction and positive argumentation. He literally strikes words like certainly and undoubtedly from his spoken vocabulary. He replaces them with phrases like I conceive, or it appears to me at present, or I should think it so for such and such reasons.
Okay, wait. I was reading his explanation of this shift, and I couldn't help but feel it was incredibly manipulative.
How do you mean?
Well, he explicitly admits that when he first adopted this Socratic method, he did it because it was very embarrassing to those against whom I used it.
Right, right.
He grew expert at drawing people into concessions and entangling them in unforeseen difficulties.
Right.
I mean, he's just playing the humble doubter to lay traps for people, right?
Mm-hmm.
It feels like a predatory debate tactic wrapped in fake humility.
You're picking up on a very real dynamic in the text there. He absolutely admits that his initial motives were weaponized.
Yeah.
He used it to obtain victories that neither he nor his cause always deserved. It was literally a tactical maneuver to disarm his opponents before springing a logical trap.
Exactly.
But, and this is key, the text reveals a profound evolution. Over a few years, he gradually abandons the manipulative trapping aspect. He retains only the habit of expressing himself in terms of modest diffidence. The tactic slowly reshaped his actual mindset. Yeah, a transition from a weapon into a genuine philosophy of open-minded collaboration.
It's so interesting because it fundamentally alters the neurology of a disagreement. Like if I walk into a marketing meeting today and definitively state, this rollout strategy will undoubtedly fail, I've just backed the person who designed that strategy into a corner.
Oh, completely.
I've triggered their ego defense. They have to either submit to my authority, which they will resent, or they have to fight me. The focus shifts entirely from the project to our respective dominance.
Exactly.
But if I use Franklin's approach and say, I imagine there might be a risk in this specific channel, if I'm not mistaken, I leave room for their ego to survive.
Yeah.
I invite them to look at the problem with me rather than making myself the problem.
And Franklin notes that the chief ends of conversation are to inform, to be informed, to please, or to persuade. A dogmatic, assuming manner instantly defeats all of those purposes.
It just shuts everything down.
Right. When you say, it appears to me, you remove the friction. People become significantly less defensive. They're more willing to agree with you, or, crucially, if they disagree, they will gently correct you without hostility.
Yeah.
This soft persuasion becomes his superpower. It's the absolute bedrock of his ability to navigate the treacherous political waters of the colonies and, later, the courts of France.
Which is incredible.
Yeah.
But knowing how to talk and write is great. It doesn't shield you from the brutal realities of the market.
No, it doesn't.
Franklin decides he's had enough of his brother's heavy-handed management of the printing house in Boston. He breaks his apprenticeship, an act he later calls his first big erratum, or typo in life, and he just runs away.
Which leads to that miserable journey we talked about earlier.
Right. Arriving in Philadelphia completely broke, buying the puffy rolls and getting laughed at by Miss Reed.
And the skills he needs upon arriving in Philadelphia aren't just rhetorical anymore. He needs to understand the mechanics of industry and, honestly, human deception.
Because his first jobs are basically masterclasses in failure.
Oh, they're disasters. He gets hired by a new printer in town named Keimer. And Keimer is a fascinating, almost tragic character. He considers himself a scholar. He had been involved with a sect of French prophets, and his method of working was completely absurd.
Oh yeah, he composed poetry directly into the printing type out of his head, right, without writing it down first.
Yes, but he knew absolutely nothing about the physical mechanics of actually operating a printing press. And then the other printer in town, Bradford, was barely literate in the trade.
So Franklin is essentially the only competent technician in a town run by amateurs.
Exactly. And this competence catches the eye of the governor of the province, Sir William Keith.
Okay, this story is amazing.
It's so good. Picture this. Franklin is working in Keimer's shop, and the governor shows up, impeccably dressed, asks to see this brilliant young printer, and takes him to a tavern.
Just a random Tuesday.
Right. They are drinking excellent Madeira wine, and Governor Keith tells him, these printers in Philly are wretched. You need to set up your own shop. I will give you all the public printing business. I will write letters of credit, and I will send you to London to buy the absolute best equipment.
And Franklin is what, a teenager?
He's a teenager. He's completely blown away. He believes every single word. So he gets on a ship to London, assuming these magical letters of credit will be in the captain's mailbag.
Which brings us to the devastating realization. They dock in London. Franklin asks for the letters, and there are no letters.
Nope. Governor Keith never wrote them.
It's just brutal.
Keith was a man who simply loved to make grand promises to feel important, with zero intention of fulfilling them. So now Franklin is stranded in a foreign country, thousands of miles from home, with absolutely no capital.
He's forced to find manual labor at a London printing house just to avoid starving.
Yes.
And, Governor Keith is the 18th century prototype of the fake VC.
Oh, that is the perfect analogy.
Right. Anyone who has spent time in a startup ecosystem knows this exact archetype. The guy in the Patagonia vest at the networking event who talks a massive game about disruption, promises you seed funding, tells you he has 1 million elite contacts he's going to introduce you to.
But when it actually comes time to sign a term sheet or write a check, he just vanishes.
Exactly. He has no capital. He just feeds on the ego boost of promising the world.
And the psychological rewiring Franklin undergoes here is foundational to his lifelong philosophy. He learns the extreme danger of relying on the unexecuted promises of powerful people.
Yeah, proximity to power is not currency.
Exactly. Flattery from authority figures is not a business model.
Yeah.
He learns to evaluate people strictly by their executed actions. This completely strips away his naivety.
Which he needed. So he manages to survive London, works incredibly hard, saves enough to get back to Philadelphia, and eventually sets up his own printing shop. But the universe immediately throws another classic archetype at him.
The cynic.
The cynic. He describes an elderly man named Samuel Mickle, who stops by Franklin's brand new shop. Mickle is what Franklin calls a croaker, a person who constantly predicts doom.
Every office has one.
They really do.
Yeah.
He stands there and tells Franklin that he is incredibly sorry for him because Philadelphia is a sinking city. He claims everyone is going bankrupt, the new construction is just a deceptive illusion, and this expensive new printing business is absolutely destined to fail.
And the psychological toll of a croaker on a young entrepreneur is immense. Franklin admits in the text that Mickle actually left him feeling half melancholy.
Oh, it genuinely shook his confidence.
Yeah. Mickle's relentless pessimism is a constant force in professional life. There is always someone ready to explain why the economy is collapsing, why your specific industry is doomed by new technology, or why your business model is flawed.
But the punchline to the Samuel Mickle story is just incredible. Mickle continued to live in Philadelphia, constantly predicting its imminent collapse. He refused to buy a house for years because he was convinced the real estate market was going to zero.
Right.
And eventually, years later, he finally gave in and bought a house for 5 times the price it was when he first started croaking.
It's such poetic justice. But Franklin's defense mechanism against the incompetence of his competitors and the pessimism of the croakers was his unrelenting, highly visible industry.
Visible being the key word there.
Exactly. He understood that in the early stages of a venture, your reputation for absolute reliability is your only real marketing tool. He made his hard work a public performance.
He literally uses a wheelbarrow as a marketing device.
He does.
He writes that to show he wasn't above his business, he would personally bring the heavy paper he purchased at the stores through the streets on a wheelbarrow. He dressed plainly. He visibly avoided places of idle diversion, like he never went out fishing or shooting.
Right. He was broadcasting a very specific signal to the market.
Yeah.
Basically, I am frugal, I am dedicated, and I am not a flight risk.
Right. But it was performative, backed by crushing actual labor.
Yeah, it wasn't fake. And there's an anecdote in the text about a meeting of the local merchants club. The general consensus at the club was that Franklin's new printing office would fail because there were already 2 established printers in town.
The market was saturated.
Exactly. But a Dr. Baird spoke up and completely changed the narrative. He told the club, "The industry of that Franklin is superior to anything I ever saw. I see him still at work when I go home from club, and he is at work again before his neighbors are out of bed."
And that one observation alters the trajectory of his business.
Dr. Baird wasn't evaluating Franklin's elegant prose or the quality of his typography. He evaluated the fact that Franklin's candle was burning later than anyone else's in town.
Exactly. That visible effort built immediate trust. The established printers had the market share, but Franklin had the undeniable momentum of industry. So the merchants started funneling lucrative contracts his way.
Which is amazing. He outworks the competition, pays off his early debts, and finally stabilizes his business. But this is where Franklin makes a profound intellectual leap.
He realizes that having a successful printing press means very little if his own internal impulses are chaotic. External success is fragile without internal discipline.
Yeah, he decides that raw ambition isn't enough anymore. He needs a systematic approach to his own character.
So he conceives what he calls the bold and arduous project of arriving at moral perfection.
Which is quite a goal.
Seriously. He decides he wants to live without committing any fault at any time. He looks at all the different philosophical and religious definitions of virtue, finds them messy and overlapping, and decides to engineer his own streamlined system.
He boils it down to 13 specific virtues.
Right. Let's see, it was temperance, silence, order, resolution, frugality, industry, sincerity, justice, moderation, cleanliness, tranquility, chastity, and humility.
13 is a lot, but the list itself is interesting, while the true genius lies in the methodology. He doesn't just make a vague New Year's resolution to, be a better person. He builds a tangible, measurable user interface for his own soul. He creates a little book with pages of specially prepared ivory so he can draw on them and wipe them clean. He draws a grid, 7 columns for the days of the week, crossed by 13 red lines for the virtues.
It is a literal 18th century habit tracking app.
It really is.
It's the precursor to every productivity and habit strengthening tool we use today. But what is so smart is how he paces it. He explicitly states that trying to fix everything at once is a recipe for failure. You cannot eradicate all the weeds in a garden at the same time.
Right, so he focuses intensely on one virtue per week. During week 1, his primary focus is temperance. He leaves the other 12 virtues to their ordinary chance, but he tracks them all. Every time he commits a fault, he makes a black spot in the grid.
His goal is to keep the temperance line completely clean for 7 days.
Exactly. If he achieves that, he assumes the habit of temperance is slightly strengthened. And in week 2, he shifts his primary focus to silence, trying to keep both temperance and silence clean. He rotates through the entire list, completing 4 full courses of the 13 virtues in a single year.
When you first read the mechanics of this, it sounds absolutely exhausting.
Oh, it sounds miserable.
It resembles the most punishing, rigorous, modern biohacking regimens where someone is tracking their macros, their REM sleep cycles, their heart rate variability, and their screen time down to the minute. Eventually, the friction of tracking outweighs the benefit, and you burn out.
And Franklin actually hits a massive wall with this system, specifically with the virtue of order.
Let all your things have their places. Let each part of your business have its time.
Yeah, order almost broke him. He had an exceptionally strong memory, so he was accustomed to just leaving papers and materials scattered everywhere, relying entirely on his brain to locate them when needed.
A classic messy genius.
Right. Trying to force himself into strict physical organizational habits was agonizing. He found himself relapsing constantly. His grid for order was completely covered in black spots. He became so frustrated that he was ready to abandon the entire project and just accept that he was going to be a flawed, disorganized person.
Which leads to my absolute favorite passage in the autobiography.
The
story of the speckled axe.
It's brilliant.
He's sitting there, totally frustrated with his inability to achieve perfection. And he remembers this story about a man who goes to a blacksmith to buy an axe. The man insists that the entire surface of the axe must be as bright and shiny as the cutting edge.
Right.
The blacksmith agrees to grind it bright, but tells the man he has to turn the heavy grindstone. The man starts turning the wheel, and it is exhausting, agonizing work.
Yeah.
The blacksmith is pressing the heavy iron hard against the stone.
Sparks flying everywhere.
Exactly. Every few minutes, the man stops, completely out of breath, to check the progress. Finally, he just gives up and says, I'll just take it as it is. The blacksmith says, no, keep turning. We will get it bright eventually. Right now, it is only speckled. And the man replies, yes, but I think I like a speckled axe best.
A speckled axe is best. It's a profound realization about the limits of human psychology. Franklin recognizes that demanding absolute, unyielding perfection of himself was becoming a form of extreme vanity, a kind of foppery in morals.
The friction of trying to be flawless was literally making him miserable.
Yeah. And more astutely, he realizes that presenting a perfectly flawless character to the world might actually be a massive liability.
Okay, wait. How is being perfect a liability?
Because a flawless character attracts intense envy and hatred from others. It makes people feel inferior. Franklin observes that a benevolent man should allow a few faults in himself to keep his friends in countenance.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
It makes you relatable. It softens you. The grace of imperfection is a social lubricant.
So the actionable takeaway here isn't that habit tracking or self-improvement is useless. It's the power of systematic, incremental focus balanced with self-forgiveness.
Precisely.
You tackle one weakness at a time. Maybe you spend an entire quarter focusing purely on improving your delegation skills, rather than trying to fix your delegation, your coding, and your public speaking all in the same month. But the speckled axe provides the necessary grace.
Yeah, if you improve your delegation by 80%, but you still occasionally micromanage a project, you don't throw away the whole system.
You accept the speckles.
Exactly. Franklin explicitly admits he never achieved perfection, but the mere attempt at the system made him a significantly better, happier, and wealthier man than he would have been without it.
The system produced progress, not perfection, which was exactly what he needed.
Right. And once he had structured his own mind and built a deeply reliable foundation for his business, he naturally started looking outward. He had the bandwidth to ask the next logical question. How do you scale this impact? How do you improve not just yourself, but the infrastructure of an entire community?
Because he knows he can't fix Philadelphia alone. He needs leverage. So he goes back to his friends and creates a club called the Ginto.
The junta.
Yeah, it's a mutual improvement society that meets on Friday evenings.
Hmm.
And once again, he leans heavily into the psychology of communication. He implements incredibly strict rules for how the junto operates.
And the Gento is a masterclass in building a functional network. It wasn't just a social drinking club, it was a diverse brain trust. A mathematician, a surveyor, a shoemaker, a joiner, a merchant's clerk.
A real mix of people.
Yeah. They required every member to produce queries on morals, politics, or natural philosophy, and occasionally write essays. But the crucial mechanic was the rule regarding dispute. Discussions had to be conducted in the sincere spirit of inquiry after truth, absolutely without fondness for dispute or desire for victory.
He actually instituted financial penalties.
He did.
Anyone who expressed a positive dogmatic opinion or directly contradicted someone else had to pay a small fine. He was literally financially enforcing the Socratic method within his network.
And by banning dogmatic contradiction, he created a psychologically safe space for rapid idea iteration. Members actively sought to help each other professionally, recommending business and pooling resources.
Franklin directly credits the Gento with being the primary engine of his early business success.
It's the exact prototype of a highly functioning modern mastermind group.
But the Gento wasn't just about enriching its members, right? Franklin uses it as an incubator for massive civic projects. They start by pooling their own books into a shared library.
Right.
When that works, Franklin realizes the entire city needs this. He proposes a public subscription library, which becomes the mother of all North American subscription libraries.
Which is a huge deal.
Huge. He later uses the exact same network to launch the Union Fire Company, initiatives for sweeping and paving the streets, the academy that eventually becomes the University of Pennsylvania, and even the first hospital in Philadelphia.
Let's look closely at how he got these massive projects funded and approved, though, because it involves a brilliant evolution of his understanding of human nature.
Yeah, the pitch process.
Exactly. When he first started soliciting subscriptions to fund the library, he hit a massive wall of resistance. People were reluctant. They balked at giving him money. And Franklin analyzed the resistance and realized it had nothing to do with the merit of the library.
What was it then?
It had everything to do with envy. They resented the fact that this young, upstart printer was proposing a project that would elevate his own reputation above theirs. If the library succeeded, Franklin would be celebrated as the founder, and human nature violently rebels against giving a peer that kind of elevated status.
This is where he executes his ultimate strategic pivot.
Yes.
He realizes that his own ego, his desire to be known as the inventor or the founder, is the exact thing killing his projects. So he removes himself from the narrative entirely.
He just puts himself out of sight.
Right. He starts pitching the library, not as his brilliant idea, but as the scheme of a number of friends who had requested him to simply walk around and propose it.
The psychological insight there is staggering. By removing his name from the project, he removed the target for their envy. The resistance vanished. People were happy to contribute to a scheme of friends.
He writes that the present little sacrifice of your vanity will afterwards be amply repaid.
Which is so true. By sacrificing the short-term dopamine hit of getting immediate credit, he achieved the long-term reality of getting the library built. Furthermore, he notes that if it remains uncertain who the true founder is, eventually someone more vain will try to claim it.
Oh, and then the public steps in.
Right. When that happens, envy will cause the public to strip the false claimant of the credit and aggressively restore it to the rightful owner.
If there's one professional takeaway from this entire text to implement tomorrow, it is this ego pivot. I mean, think about a project you're trying to push through at work right now. Are you facing bizarre, illogical resistance? Are people dragging their feet?
It might be because your colleagues or your boss feel like you are trying to outshine them.
Exactly. What would happen if you walked into the next meeting and instead of saying, here is my brilliant plan to fix our supply chain, you said, a few of us were brainstorming and we thought this might be an interesting approach to explore.
It changes everything.
If you want a project to succeed, you often have to deliberately remove your name from the marquee. By sacrificing vanity, you achieve the reality.
And for Franklin, this wasn't just a political tactic for getting libraries built. It became a deeply held philosophy of open-source contribution.
The stove.
Yes, the stove. In 1742, he invents the Pennsylvania fireplace, commonly known as the Franklin stove. It is a massive technological leap that warms rooms better while saving significant fuel. The governor of Pennsylvania is so impressed, he offers Franklin a patent for the sole vending of the stoves.
And in the 18th century, that patent would have generated an absolute fortune.
Unquestionable wealth.
And Franklin flat out declines the patent.
Yeah.
He just gives the design away for free.
His reasoning is explicitly stated and deeply philosophical. He wrote that, as we enjoy great advantages from the inventions of others, we should be glad of an opportunity to serve others by any invention of ours. And this we should do freely and generously.
Oh.
Yeah. An ironmonger in London eventually stole the design, tweaked it slightly, patented it there, and made a fortune. Franklin knew about the theft, and he simply didn't care.
He just let it go.
He hated disputes. His goal wasn't maximum personal extraction of wealth. His goal was maximum utility for society.
It is the exact philosophical foundation of the modern open-source software movement. The belief that sharing the code, sharing the invention freely, creates a vastly better ecosystem for everyone, which ultimately benefits the creator as well. Okay. He is playing an infinite game, whereas the London ironmonger is playing a finite game.
Precisely. And this brings us to the final evolution of his philosophy. As an elder statesman, Franklin steps back and synthesizes decades of observations about business, time management, and human nature into enduring maxims.
Right. Poor Richard's Almanac.
Yeah. Exactly. For 25 years, he published it. He realized the common people bought scarcely any other books, so he utilized the margins of the calendar to print proverbs inculcating industry and frugality.
We still use these maxims constantly. There are no gains without pains. Beware of little expenses. A small leak will sink a great ship. Lost time is never found again. Early to bed and early to rise.
Yep. And he eventually compiled all these scattered maxims into one connected discourse called The Way to Wealth.
Reading The Way to Wealth today, it reads exactly like a hardcore hustle culture manifesto.
Oh, it really does.
It is relentless. It is all about grinding, never sleeping too much, working constantly, and saving every single penny. The sleeping fox catches no poultry. It can actually feel a bit overwhelming, almost toxic in its demand for constant productivity.
It absolutely can, but it is vital to balance the relentless grind of The Way to Wealth with another incredibly revealing piece of writing he does later in life. It's a letter to Madame Briand, known as The Whistle.
Oh, I love this letter.
If The Way to Wealth is a manual on how to acquire capital and build a business, The Whistle is a profound framework for understanding the true value of things, so you don't destroy your soul in the process of acquiring that wealth.
The story of The Whistle is so universally relatable. Franklin writes to his friend about a vivid memory from when he was 7 years old. His friends had given him a pocket full of coppers, like a bunch of loose change.
Right.
He is thrilled, and he immediately runs off to a shop where they sell toys. On the way there, he passes another boy blowing a whistle. Young Franklin is so entirely charmed by the sound of this whistle that he stops the boy and offers him all the money in his pockets in exchange for it.
Every single penny.
Every penny. He makes the trade, goes home, and marches all over the house, blowing this whistle, incredibly pleased with his purchase. But then his brothers, sisters, and cousins find out what he paid.
And they just lay into him.
They inform him that he gave 4 times as much for the whistle as it was actually worth. They start listing all the incredible things he could have bought with the rest of the money, and they laugh at him so relentlessly for his foolishness that he breaks down crying. The chagrin of being mocked vastly outweighed the pleasure of the whistle.
It is a painful childhood memory, but the genius is how he scales this memory into an adult framework for evaluating opportunity cost. He writes that as he grew up, came into the world, and observed the actions of men, he realized that most of the miseries of mankind are brought upon them by making false estimates of the value of things.
They give too much for their whistles.
Exactly.
The translation to modern professional life is perfect.
Yeah.
Franklin says when he sees a man sacrificing his time, his repose, his liberty, his virtue, and his friends just to attain court favor, which we can easily translate to a massive promotion, or access to the C-suite or a specific title, Franklin says, this man gives too much for his whistle. When he sees someone neglecting their own affairs for the sake of political popularity, they pay too much for their whistle. When he sees a miser giving up the joy of comfortable living, the esteem of his peers, and the joys of friendship just to accumulate a massive bank account, he says, poor man, you pay too much for your whistle.
It's the ultimate antidote to the burnout of hustle culture. The profound question Franklin poses is this: what is the whistle you are currently chasing? And what is the actual holistic price you are paying for it?
That's a heavy question.
It is. Are you sacrificing your peace of mind, your marriage, your physical health, or your foundational integrity just to secure a specific job title or hit a revenue milestone? If the cost to your personal ecosystem is higher than the true value of the achievement, you are overpaying. You are paying too much for the whistle.
It perfectly balances the way to wealth. You need the industry and the frugality to build the foundation, but you need the wisdom of the whistle to know when to stop turning the grindstone. You have to value your internal peace. And there is one final, incredibly brief story from his letters that ties this entire philosophy of ego management and humility together. It's the story of Cotton Mather.
Ah, yes. Franklin recalls visiting the famous Puritan minister Cotton Mather in Boston when Franklin was still a young man. As the visit concludes, Franklin is leaving the house, and they are walking through a very narrow, low passage.
Okay.
Mather is walking behind him and suddenly shouts, "Stoop! Stoop!" Franklin doesn't understand the instruction, keeps walking completely upright, and violently smashes his head against a low wooden beam.
Ouch.
Yeah. But Mather uses the moment to deliver a lasting lesson. He says, "You are young and have the world before you. Stoop as you go through it, and you will miss many hard thumps."
Stoop as you go through it. It perfectly encapsulates his entire operational model. The modest diffidence he used in conversation, dropping words like certainly to avoid triggering people's defenses, the willingness to let others take the credit for the public library so the project would actually get built, the refusal to patent the stove so society could benefit. It's all about not carrying your head so high that you get knocked out by your own pride. For Franklin, humility isn't just a moral virtue to be tracked on a grid, it is a profound tactical advantage. It helps you navigate the incredibly low beams and hard thumps of the professional world.
When you synthesize the mechanics of everything we've explored today, you see a man who treated his own character and his career as an ongoing, iterative experiment.
He really did.
He wasn't born a genius diplomat or a wealthy polymath. He was a runaway who systematically analyzed his own abrasive flaws. He hacked his communication style to reduce friction. He leveraged radical, visible industry to outshine cynics. He built a literal grid to measure his morality. And he learned to actively manage his ego in order to scale his impact on the world.
It is a staggering trajectory. From the dirty teenager walking up Market Street eating puffy rolls, laughed at by his future wife, to the man who built a civic empire, tamed electricity, and helped birth a nation. He mastered his words, he tracked his habits, and he checked his ego.
And yet, despite all of that achievement, he never claimed to have achieved perfection. Which leads me to a final reflection drawn from the very first pages of his autobiography.
Okay, let's hear it.
Franklin wrote that if he were offered the choice, he would gladly live his entire life over again from the beginning. His only request would be the advantage that authors have in a second edition: the ability to correct the errata, the printing errors of the first edition.
Oh, wow.
He viewed his major life mistakes, like breaking his apprenticeship or misjudging a business partner, not as fatal sins or permanent failures, but as typos.
Errata. I absolutely love that framing. A typo doesn't ruin the book. It just means the manuscript needs an edit.
Exactly. So think about a recent professional failure, a terrible decision, or a massive misstep that is keeping you up at night. What if you stopped viewing that mistake as a permanent, catastrophic stain on your record?
Yeah.
What if you simply viewed it as an erratum, a typo in the first draft of your career? You have the power to make that correction in tomorrow's edition of your life.
That perfectly shatters the myth of the perfectly engineered LinkedIn profile we talked about at the start. The pristine, error-free resume just doesn't exist. The reality of success is the messy first draft. The reality is the speckled axe. And a speckled, heavily edited career is always better and infinitely more interesting than the illusion of a perfect one.
Well said.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Benjamin Franklin's incredibly messy, brilliant life. Keep exploring the source material, stoop as you go, and we will see you next time.